Have you ever driven home and realized you don't remember a single turn you made? Or found yourself scrolling on your phone, then suddenly an hour has gone by and you couldn't tell me what you looked at? That's dissociation. For some people, it's harmless daydreaming. But for others, it's a survival skill that rewired their brain at some point just to try to keep them alive and functioning in the environment they were in. Dissociation is a disconnection between your thoughts, your body, your memory, or your sense of self. It exists on a spectrum, from zoning out in class to losing whole chunks of time. Everyone experiences it at some point. But for trauma survivors, it can become a primary coping mechanism. Think of dissociation like a circuit breaker. The breaker doesn't blow because the house is broken, right? The breaker blows or flips to keep the whole system from burning down. So it's protective. When the brain senses extreme danger, it runs through its options. It can either fight, it can go into flight, or it can freeze. If fighting back or escaping isn't possible, the brain uses dissociation, which pulls you away from the full force of what's happening. It keeps you safe in the moment, but when it becomes chronic, it can interfere with daily life. So, what is happening in the brain whenever we are dissociating? Well, first, the amygdala goes into overdrive, setting off the alarm system. That's the fight or flight, freeze, what are we going to do? And then the prefrontal cortex goes offline, making logical thought and decision making harder. The hippocampus, which is the memory center, starts to have difficulty forming memories. This is why people often can't recall parts of traumatic events. And then the area that is responsible for the freeze response is the para-aqueductal gray area. And this is a deep survival circuit. And then there's also the default mode network. Sometimes this can stay unusually active, creating that out of body, like I'm watching myself from the outside sensation that some people describe, almost like a third person. Then there's also a chemistry shift. The sympathetic system floods with adrenaline. And then the parasympathetic system overcompensates, numbing, slowing, dulling sensations. It's like your brain pulls the fire alarm, then evacuates you from the building. You're technically safe, but you're not there to even witness what's happening. Some examples of situations that may cause dissociation afterward, or just some real life examples, would be a car accident result in trauma freezes. So for example, you're in a car accident. The sound of the crash is deafening, but in the next second, it's like the volume cuts out. Everything feels slow, like you're watching it on mute. Later, you can't remember exactly how you got out of the car. Just flashes, like snapshots. That's dissociation protecting you from the overwhelm of that situation, which is a horrific car accident. Another example is a childhood argument. So as a child, you hear your parents screaming. You can't fight back. You can't leave. So your brain does the only thing it can. It takes you somewhere else. You stare at the pattern in the wallpaper until the sound feels far away. That wallpaper becomes your escape hatch. That's dissociation. And you're technically entering a different brain state when you do that. Another example is an everyday, milder situation that I was thinking. So you're at work, a coworker is yelling, and suddenly you notice you're staring at their mouth moving, but you're not hearing their words coming out. And the clock is ticking, but time doesn't feel real. You come back 10 minutes later when the meeting's almost over, That's a dissociative response too. It's not as dramatic, but still, your brain is pulling you out when it feels unsafe or bored. So there are types of dissociation. So type 1 is depersonalization, which is when someone's like, I don't feel real. I feel like I'm outside my body. Number 2 is derealization, which is when the world looks dreamlike or fake. And then number 3 is amnesia, which are memory gaps, especially surrounding traumatic events. And when you can't remember, and like those snapshots I mentioned, you can't really remember exactly the sequence of events, but there are snapshots and you can remember bits and pieces. 4 is identity disturbance or identity fragmentation. So this can be confusion about yourself, which in extreme cases can become dissociative identity disorder, which is DID, which you may have heard of, which is like the famous case of Sybil. And then that's a very like controversial diagnosis in itself. And I would think that somatic processing disorders or things like conversion disorder could also have elements of dissociation to them. There are misunderstandings about dissociation because of pop culture. It often reduces dissociation to multiple personalities, but most dissociation is very subtle. It's not like having multiple personalities and turning into another person or taking on another identity in order to cope with what's going on, which is what multiple personality disorder, also known as dissociative identity disorder, is. So the signs of dissociation, not of DID, the signs of dissociation, like mild dissociation on a daily basis, they can be simple. They can be blank stares, lost time, feeling numb, or just feeling checked out. Too often, people are judged as lazy, distracted, or even intoxicated or inebriated, when in reality, their brain is just protecting them or is just off somewhere else. The impact this has is short-term and long-term. So protective numbing in the short term helps someone endure the unbearable in that moment, right? And then in the long term, dissociation can cause memory gaps in the long-term memory of what happened, for instance, when you were a child. It can cause a disrupted sense of identity in general and difficulty with emotional connections. Dissociation is very common in PTSD, borderline personality disorder, complex trauma disorders, and sometimes in people with prolonged stress or unsafe childhoods. Imagine living behind tinted windows. The world is there, but distant and muted. Over time, you forget what direct sunlight feels like. Dissociation is not weakness. It's just proof your brain did what it had to do. And now you have to find ways to recognize what's going on and then heal. Start to heal from it. So you can use things like grounding tools. These are extremely effective. Touch something cold. Name objects in the room. Use your senses to anchor yourself. Choose to keep yourself there, even though it's uncomfortable. Obviously, therapy is huge because it helps retain the brain to stay present in safe environments or in unsafe environments, meaning you don't always have to dissociate just because discomfort arises. And it takes work. It's hard. It's difficult, and nobody's saying that it's not a difficult thing. And then relationships, safe people, just having one safe relationship can help rewire the nervous system toward connection instead of disconnection and kind of reestablish that balance. Dissociation is one of the quietest survival skills our brain can use. Sometimes it looks like daydreaming. Sometimes it looks like lost time while you were driving to the store and back. But at its core, it's your brain's way of saying, this is too much for one person to carry right now. Healing isn't about tearing down that circuit breaker. It's about learning how to handle the current so the lights can stay on and you can finally come home to yourself. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.